Hello, everyone. So I'm going to use what I call my barnyard voice today because we're having some technical sound issues with microphones, but that will be alleviated at 2 o'clock once the show is done outside and we can use our microphone again. Who would have thought that everybody would be on the same frequency when we use our microphones in downtown? But that's what's happening today. So welcome to today's program. My name is Candace Summers. I'm the Senior Director of Education here at the museum. And we are thrilled to be hosting Dr. Jim Simeone for another program here. He was here a few years ago talking about another book. So we're super excited to have him back. He's a professor of political science at Illinois Wesleyan, for those of you who don't know. And he's going to be doing a presentation on his newest book, The Saints and the State: The Mormon Troubles in Illinois. I'm very interested in this topic. I've never been to Nauvoo, but I definitely want to go and learn some more about the history. And so it's great to have this presentation today. You can also pick up a copy of the book down in the gift shop for $39.95 at the end of the program, or if you already have your copy, he'll sign them downstairs after the program too. We are live streaming this event on our YouTube page. So if there's anything you don't want heard on the internet, don't say it during this program. So right around the 2 o'clock hour, for those of us who are joining online, we're going to take a brief intermission. Remember when we used to have intermissions during movies and things? We're going to reinstate that today so we can do a quick change of microphones so that you folks get an awesome experience here in the room with the microphone, just like the folks online are going to get with the little microphone I'm holding in my hand. And then we'll get back to the program. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end as well. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Jim Simeone.
Well, thanks to Candace and to the McLean County Historical Society for having me here. I especially want to thank you all for coming. I have a lot of friends in the room here, several people, Nazma and Richard, who are mentioned in the introduction. I have my colleagues, I have my soccer friends. I don't see how I can fail. Thank you. And I have Velma Nordine, my neighbor. So Velma, that thing about the internet and the bad speaking, that was for you. So try to keep your civil tongue. Okay, so I thought a good way to have a beginning here was to talk about these three questions. Why does a political scientist study frontier Illinois? And, I think it's a fair question. Back when I was casting about for a topic for my dissertation in graduate school, the concept of republicanism was very popular and had become an alternative way of viewing American history. Generally, we're used to thinking of the American government and American state as a liberal state, meaning a state that focuses on consent of the governed, limitation on the rights, the powers of the government, and using rights like a Bill of Rights and a Constitution to limit government and to empower the people. But there was also this Republican tradition that people started talking about, which was more communitarian and focused on the public good and talked about the need to sacrifice for the public good. And it was very much focused around the discourse of corruption and virtue. So I thought, wow, let me check that out. My problem with it was very elitist. It seemed to be only among the intellectuals. And I wanted to know, what were the actual citizens? What were the actual Republicans doing? Right? And right off the bat, I found in Frontier, Illinois, that the actual Republicans and some of the people who were most proud of their republicanism were also pro-slavery. They had an idea of changing the Illinois Constitution to make it a slave state. So right off the bat, I saw a contradiction between what the scholars were saying about republicanism, which was very, idealistic, I guess you could say, and what was happening on the ground. So I think that made sense as a political scientist to focus on that topic. Then the question is, why the Mormons? Well, democracy is notoriously insensitive to minorities. That's just part and parcel, I think, of majority rules thinking. It's part of democracy to be tentative, I would say, toward the protection of minorities. I think, obviously, the United States has tried to do as good a job as possible, but it's very tricky, right? The other thing is, the Mormons were a sort of a special case. They were a minority in Illinois, but they were a majority in Hancock County. So think more the Protestants in Northern Ireland model rather than necessarily simply a straightforward minority. The other thing about the Mormons that I have to mention, which is that they keep wonderful records. And part of my project being a kind of bottom-up approach to try to get into the minds of the average person who's experiencing democracy, I wanted to actually see what the journals and what the letters of the Mormons said, right? I wanted to see what the average person said. So, gosh, nothing better than to have that source. And then finally, why Illinois and democracy in the first place? Here I have to give what is basically a straightforward personal reason. My grandfathers. That's Angelo Simeone on the left and Giovanni Gastadello on the right. And they came to Illinois from Italy in 1908 and 1912, respectively, because it was a land of opportunity and a land of political freedom. In Italy, if you were a propertyless farmer, you couldn't vote in that period. 1919, you could, right? Ken, good to see you. I have a handout over there. Ken Burke, my buddy from the ACLU. Wow. At this point, my life has been completed. I have all my local friends in the group. So yes, the idea of Illinois democracy being a place where you even leave your home country to come to, right? Wow, sounds like democracy is a good thing. So I would say that it's true that in democracy we have what I call the happy face of popular justice, right? It's the idea that the people, whether you're in the majority or the minority, you can claim from the government some justice, right? Now, it's also true that there's a dark face to democracy, a shadow side. You've got the happy face of popular justice, but then you have the more shadowy and sinister face of rough justice. Rough justice you could define as, I think I defined it on the handout there, as, you know, the desire by the majority to get its way without having to go through all that cumbersome due process, all those persnickety rights that the minorities get, right? Oh, that's such a pain. And what if we just did what we know the people want and delivered justice directly, right? So I think democracy sets up this tension because you're both endorsing popular justice, but you're also risking a rough justice. So these are all the reasons why I'm particularly interested in this topic. Okay. I also wanted to talk about what I was doing in Chicago at this time because I have a lot of parallels with Thomas Ford, who I find to be a very admirable governor. I know Stuart here, my historian friend, doesn't like Thomas Ford very well, but and he was something of a political hack. He was a Democrat, okay? But I had a different experience with Illinois democracy in Chicago, okay? I was fighting the Chicago machine, you know, kind of like you saw with Blagojevich and Madigan. Well, all those characters, they're the ones I knew best, okay? Very corrupt, okay? Very self-centered, okay? So I was working with David Orr. By the way, David Orr was the only Protestant, the only white Protestant in the City Council of Chicago in 1983, and he was born in Bloomington on Woodland, okay? But he was a wonderful progressive and a great reformer. So our goal was to reform the machine, okay? And then in 83, after, who was it who died in office? Well, Harold Washington died in office, but I guess it was Eugene, it was before Eugene Sawyer. Well, basically what happened was the machine split, and they weren't certain whether they were going to support Jane Byrne or whether they were going to support Richie Daley. At the same time, Harold Washington was also running, right? And so it was a primary, and Harold won the primary. So what amazed me about Harold Washington, he was a Marine, he was a member of Congress, he had a master's of public administration, okay? He was, more importantly, an honest man. When the machine turned their back on Harold Washington, and instead of endorsing him, he won the primary, went for a Republican before it's too late because he was an African American. That was my first lesson, really, in Illinois democracy. And I don't think I ever properly learned that lesson, is what I'm basically confessing here. Because my experience is that Thomas Ford also never learned a lesson. So let's get to Ford a little bit later. I have a picture of him. Here is a 42 portrait when he became governor. He was sort of an accidental governor, as they said. The machine candidate was died unexpectedly in May of the election year. And so they put him in. And he won. He held office during the Mormon troubles. I see him as a tragic figure, and I relate to him. He tried to get his developing democracy to deliver popular justice. He tried to ignore the white supremacy, pandering of his party leaders, and he hoped he could tilt his party in an inclusive, universal, egalitarian direction. He expected justice to be delivered with due process. And like me, he was disappointed. So more on him later. Let's get to defining these terms. We've got the saints and the state. Let's start with the state. Think of Illinois state as a developing democracy, right? Developing democracies are those forms of government in which you encourage people to pursue popular justice, but you don't have the capacity to enforce the law. You don't have the capacity to actually deliver on your promises in many cases. You don't even have the power to see that the law is enforced, especially locally. And in a frontier society, there's a lot of disorder happening. It's also a settler state, okay? Now, a settler state is a place where a previously occupied piece of land is taken over by a number of immigrants who then proclaim that they are the true state, and they create a model of what the ideal citizen would look like. And in Illinois, our model was basically the independent producer, right? Here's a piece of currency, so we use the word script. We have to remember that back in the day, there were no greenbacks until after the Civil War, or during the Civil War. Before the Civil War, currency or money in the United States was just a piece of paper issued by a bank. So this is the script, but there you see the famous, I guess I can use this, there is the plowboy, right? And that became sort of the image and the ideal citizen, if you will. And who gets to be a member then, right, of this new settler state? The independent producers. And on the liberal side, you have that producerism where basically people are contributing to oh boy, I'm going to see if I can fight the drag show out there. If I could just be a little louder. I have to use my canon voice. The idea of the producer was very important for settler states. You go back to Thomas More's Utopia. In that book, which 1512, he's basically authorizing that people can go into, state areas that are settled sparsely and just take them over and make their own state. It just became a model for how liberal societies worked. So that became inherited by the American settlers who came to Illinois. So they tried to shape their state to make it attractive for all immigrants and all emigrants. Okay. I want to point out also that this standard of the independent producer is obviously not objective. It's applied randomly somewhat. It's applied by your fellow neighbors. This is why I'm so scared that Velma's here, right? Is she going to accept me as worthy for Taylor Street, right? Velma's been on Taylor Street for over 40 years, or maybe longer. And so, it's like a membership, and you have to be worthy to be the member, right? And of course, there's a lot of misrecognition. This is something that Hegel worried about, that the fellow citizens really wouldn't recognize each other as full members. And indeed, that becomes an issue. The other factor that I wanted to talk about a bit was that when we define government generally, when we define the state generally, we define it as government. But really, it's more accurate to think of the state as government plus civil society groups. The civil society groups often help enforce the law, especially in a developing democracy, okay? So that becomes an important thing to think about, that society plays a role in enforcing who gets recognized as an independent producer, okay? And obviously when they do that, they're biased. They enforce the rules in a biased way, okay? This is what Thomas Ford was trying to ignore, okay? But it's a fact. It's a truth about our democracies. And it's something that we need as a group here, as a community, to think about. So, and I mentioned here other groups. The militia is a classic example of a civil society group that is enforcing the law. The state doesn't have enough capacity to really protect the frontiers and the borders, and so they call on militias. You also have posses that sheriffs are regularly asking to form to go round up criminals. And then you have, also claim societies. This is back in the day before the public lands were often publicly available. They were still surveying the land. And so often people would come and what we would normally say squat on the land, and they would live there for several years. And then when time came for the land to go on sale, they would all come together in a claim society, and when the auction happened, everyone made sure that the person who actually lived on that site got that site at the low government price of, I think it was $1.25 an acre at that time. Okay, so these groups, these civil society groups that are part and parcel of enforcing the law, that are part and parcel of government and of the authority of government and the state, are real, and they have an impact. I think I was going to mention here the White Rabbit militias in Illinois that we have today, right? They're an illegal militia group that went up to Minneapolis and were involved in a firebombing in a mosque, right? But they saw themselves as the state. And you say, well, where did they get this idea? It's written right into our history. It's part of who we are. And so we need to embrace that and investigate it and examine it, okay? So I have here a sketch of the Carthage Greys. Let me see if I can use this. There you go. This is a sketch of the Carthage jail, and basically they're trying to show what the militia looks like. And there was this group called the Carthage Greys, and they were a volunteer company out of Hancock County. Back at that time, it wasn't illegal to form a volunteer militia. All right, and you can kind of see that there's a push and pull going on here. On the one hand, the state needs to have the law enforced, but on the other hand, men in particular, men are particularly happy to join the militia because it strengthens their civic status. It increases their worth in the community's eyes, right? So they're getting something out of this too, right? Just as the independent producer, just as the producer is both getting something out of having a farm, but also important for someone like Thomas More or John Locke, adding surplus to the community, right? So you're working hard to produce something on your farm, but then you produce enough for your family, but also for other people in the community. This is an important justification for the independent producer. I used the word regime services and governance load. Let's pass that for now. Okay, so let's go. I want to show, the idea of the old settlers. Here's another piece of script with the plowboy, right? This is 1841, right during this period. Someone like Tony Adeje is a lover of stamps. I'm sure you would also love some of these amazing scripts, Tony, especially if they're in mint condition, right? Okay, so yeah, the idea, though, of the old settler is often contested because people say, well, gosh, how long were you really there before someone else came, right? We're going to see that the Mormons are treated as Johnny-come-latelys, new settlers, right? And yet, in some cases, the old settlers were actually in places like Hancock County after the Mormons came. So this whole definition of the old settler and the worth of the old settler is something that was discussed in Illinois at the time. I would just point out that these claim societies were an important part of the old settlers. Just to give a quick... So I've been 20 minutes here. This is a poem that I found in the Galena Advertiser, and it's on your handout. And it kind of gives you an idea of how people thought. So the Sauk Indians, the untutored Sauk who scorns laborious toil, now mourns the loss of once his native soil. In exile forced by some superior hand, he finds a home in some more foreign land. The graves where once his warlike fathers lay, and of course that was part of the big gravamen that the Native Americans had with the Illinois settlers was, you're taking the land of our fathers, where we buried our fathers. The burial land is very important to us. The white man's plow is sweeping fast away. He turns, but seldom, to review the place where ample plenty once supplied his race. Revenge, half smothered within his bosom, burns the white man's art, and all his race he spurns. If heaven bequeath the earth's surface to the white, to rob the red man then is doing right. If nations plunder nations of their soil, the deed is justified by want of spoil. No matter whether man or bird or beast, the strongest party triumphs over the least. Since then it is so, we will again revert to Dubuque village and its rights assert. Any, what do you make of that? Jack, what do you make of that?
It's very interesting.
Very interesting. Okay, anything pop out at you in there? Over the, where was that?
That third line from the bottom, strongest party.
Oh, yes, a little social Darwinism, huh? The old using the idea of evolution. Races evolve, and some races beat out other races, and that's justified.
Well, and it certainly reflects what has been going on all over the world for many, many years, where a stronger people conquers another, takes over their land, gets rid of their records, and all that. That's certainly not an American thing.
True, settler states are all around the world, especially based on colonial societies and colonialism, right? So with settler states comes colonialism. Yes, what do you have, Molly?
Not much separation of church and state.
Yeah, that's right. Where do you see in particular the religious emphasis?
Well, we're doing this because God told us it was okay.
Oh, that's right. Where was that again? If heaven, Right, okay, right. So you get this, you get the idea of these background assumptions. These background assumptions are driving the way people are behaving, right? And this poem nicely illustrates that. I wanted to emphasize the spoil idea. Yeah, Stuart.
What year was it?
1835.
35, right after the Black Hawk War then.
There you go.
And so what's the status of the village?
That's a good question. It was a territorial outpost, and undoubtedly it had been. When you usually use the word village in this period, it means a mixed community of whites and native peoples, right? So we had Mackinac Village. Yes.
Was this around the time of the Manifest Destiny?
Yes, Manifest Destiny was one of those quotes that came out of a number of New York newspapers in the 1840s, right? So, it was also a kind of lingua franca, and that's what I'm trying to suggest, that these ideas are in the air, right? You don't need to study Harrington or Locke, okay? That's part of my argument, right? These are actually ordinary people who think these thoughts, right? The other point I wanted is this thing about the spoil, right? This thing about, what does that mean? Nations of their spoil. It just means back to this idea, well, if the Native Americans are hunting and gathering, they're not using the land to its full capacity, you know? Whereas if you produce surplus, you've justified. You've made your taking of the land right. Now, I would just point out two quick points. Did the Native Americans, in fact, labor? Yes. Did they, in fact, cultivate? Yes, right? But their fellow citizens didn't recognize that they did those things. So there's that misrecognition that Hegel was so worried about, right? It's a fact. It does happen. That's number one. Number two, interestingly, without a doubt, anytime you have a marginal a person in a community, a liminal person, a person who's on the edge, whose identity is a little different, right? They become targets, right? And so, without a doubt, the racism, if you will, is behind the misrecognition of the Native Americans. What I found fascinating about the Mormon case is that it allows us to control for the race variable, because these Mormons are all from New England. Okay, they are, you know, considered white people, right? So it allows us to sort of control for race as we're looking at this phenomenon of state and civil society and actors enforcing the law. Okay, I promised my wife that I was not going to make this boring and go on, and now in fact I'm already doing that. So. Let's see if we can. I want to talk a little bit about this. Okay, that's the state. What about the Mormons? Well, the Mormons were quite remarkable. They came from Missouri at this point as refugees, okay? And they were welcomed. They were recognized as refugees by the Illinois people, in part because the Illinoisans were trying to show how different they were from those nasty Missourians. The Missourians were the ones who had kicked out the Mormons, and the Illinoisans, not being a slave state, they were going to be better. They knew how to do religious freedom, right? Forget this religious persecution and bias and bigotry like you have in Missouri. So they were actually welcomed, and actually the town of Quincy to this day is celebrated by the Mormons as a place of refuge. Because they were not only they were mistreated in Missouri, but they were kicked out of their homes during the winter, and so they were particularly pitiful. I think Nazma, because in the book I didn't explain as much about Missouri because I was so interested in other things. Nazma, who read the draft, said, "Oh, you better start talking about what exactly happened there in Missouri." Thank you, Nazma. That helped me. But guess what? I'm going to short sight the Missourians again because there's too much to talk about. But okay, so yeah, I want to show the. So were they considered independent producers? Yes. Look at this sketch of Nauvoo in 1844. The city of Nauvoo was considered an amazing wonder. They had 1,000 structures in a very short amount of time, and in 1840 alone, they had 1,000 buildings had been built. So without a doubt, the Mormons were considered producers, right? There was sort of a dark cloud on the horizon, right? Just on the other side of the river was the Iowa Territory, which was known for its lawlessness. And I want to show this map. I don't know why that number 9 is appearing. In any case, this is Hancock County. And what I wanted to show you in particular were these Des Moines River rapids. Because people don't think now, of course, the Army Corps of Engineers has turned the Mississippi into a trade corridor, right? But back in the day, there were rapids on the Mississippi. And you had to get out here, or just across from Warsaw, and basically people were transported the 12 miles up to Montrose. And then once you got there, you could go up the river again, right? So the big steamboat would meet you there. But of course, this town of Montrose, I noticed Drake Zimmerman is not here. That's Drake Zimmerman's hometown, and you can rib him, right? Because that's that's known to be an outlaw place. I mean, basically, what you have is a number of teamsters who are irregularly but gainfully employed, moving people's packages, but they might be free for a whole week with nothing to do, and yet they made a lot of money, and their families were not around. So can you guess what kind of community that was? Right? Just add whiskey, and you've got a party town. You've got downtown Bloomington, and the result of that, of course, is that you get a bad reputation on the frontier. And the Mormons were not wealthy, and they couldn't afford land in a good place, right? So they had to buy land in a place that was at Nauvoo there, which was suspect. But of course, in a frontier, the word gets around. And that didn't help them. That didn't help their reputation. They got a reputation of being thieves and counterfeiters simply by being so close to Montrose and Iowa Territory. Okay, so let's then go to, I also have the temple, which is that's John D. Lee. I wanted to say just quickly, John D. Lee is one of the Mormon followers, one of the regular Mormons, if you will. I mean, he was a polygamist, and he did have, I think, like 12 wives by the time he was out in Utah. But back in this time, he was born in Kaskaskia. He was an orphan. He had an African-American maid who raised him. He only spoke French until he was 8. The kids at school made fun of him because they called him Gumbo because he didn't speak, regular English. He was kind of an outcast, okay? Anyway, when he's 19 years old, he's one of the teamsters who's running people up and down the rapids, right? But he is an honest person. So he actually helps the people instead of, taking their money, agreeing to help them, and then leaving, which has happened many, many times, right? So we learned a lot about the roustabouts through the Mormon record, okay? He's an interesting character. He's a member of the Mormon Militia, which is called the Navu Legion. So the Mormons have their own militia. They also have their own informal militia, kind of like a posse, right? And they were called the Danites. And they're the sort of the heavy hitters of Mormon. They're the real law enforcers I found this so attractive as a topic because it reminds me of the mafia in Sicily. The Danites are like your local protection entity, right? Okay, so let's go then. Let's finally get to. Here's an example of John D. Lee is a member of the Navu Legion. There you see the temple in the background. They got into the wearing the uniforms and everything. And here's an example of the Danites helping save the Mormons from massacre in Missouri. They needed the Danites. They needed an enforcement group, okay? So then we get to the Nauvoo Temple. Of course, that also was an example of Mormon producerism. It was finally completed in 1846. 1845, I guess, the fall of 1845, they started using it. That's going to be important for us in a minute. Let's just go to Joseph Smith. We need to talk about him. So he was born in Shannon, Vermont in 1805 to a very religious but poor family. They moved to the Erie Canal area of upper state New York. And wow, they went from a farm community to a boom town. and they were quite shook up by the whole experience. There were just about every Protestant sect was proselytizing in that area, and for a family that was so religious to see so much competition among the Protestants, it seemed ungodly and unseemly. You know, Smith was brought up to think that there was sort of one true religion, and pluralism, which we these days think is just a natural part of American democracy, was not an attractive part for Smith and his family, right? So that, I think, gives you a little hint at why he develops the religion he does. So the other thing about the family that you need to know is they were gold diggers. They were people who were searching for sunken treasure that the pirates had left, and they called them diggers. And they were also beguiled by magic. Joseph Smith was especially interested in magic, and he had a famous peepstone that he used. He had a number of peepstones, little stones that he could use to look into the ground and see where the gold was. Okay, so, and I'm going to truncate a lot of history here. Basically, he then he has several revelations. God comes to him. A prophet, Moroni, comes to him and says in 1826 that basically there's some golden plates buried in the ground which have scripture on them, and you have been chosen to decipher them and bring them to the American people who sorely need some guidance on religion. And so this eventually becomes the Book of Mormon. In Illinois, it's called the Golden Bible. They're always talking about the Golden Bible. That's a way of belittling the Mormons, without a doubt, right? This is a religion founded by some gold diggers, right? I have a number of quotes I could give you, people outraged by the various ideas that the Mormons had. So just to quickly on the Book of Mormon, the story of a lost tribe of Hebrews who come to North America. You get the second coming of Christ. Christ comes to North America to try to get these people to move in the right direction. They've divided into two groups, the Lamanites and the Nephites. The Nephites are sort of related to Moroni, but the Lamanites are considered a degenerate saved people. And of course, if you know anything about the Bible or the Old Testament, there's nothing but a story of the chosen people constantly backsliding and falling down on their job of being the chosen people, right? Same sort of plot line here, right? So Jesus comes again, can't bring these people together. They end up fighting it out. Moroni buries the Bible. Joseph Smith finds it, and now it's his job to translate it and to bring the new religion back to the new world, maybe build the third temple, right? The famous third temple that the Israelites are always talking about, right? They had their first temple, and then the Romans destroyed the second temple. They're still looking to build that third temple, right? Same thing with the Mormons, right? So the temple is very important for the Mormons, and I'm going to talk about that a bit too. Then Smith founds the Church of Christ, as he calls it, in 1830, to lead the chosen people, the saints, later called Mormons, in the last days to prepare for the way for the third coming of Christ. And they eventually become the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. They spent some time in Ohio. We're skipping that. Joseph Smith got tarred and feathered in Ohio. Then they spent some time in Missouri. They were seeking out the Native Americans because, as Lamanites, they were people who needed to be converted. They were the fallen, chosen people, and the Mormons had to go convert the Native Americans. So the Native Americans were like, "Get out of here! You're crazy." So that didn't work out. That didn't work out very well. But then they got into some struggles with the Missourians. The Missourians did not treat them well. and they had a massacre with 17 Mormons killed, and the Mormons just finally decided to just leave the state, and they come to Illinois as refugees. Okay, that was for you, Nazma, so to give a little backstory on the Missourians. The result of this, though, is that Hancock County suddenly gets a big, group of people who come to their county, right? And I wanted to talk about the temple a bit. Just between 1840 and 1843, Joseph Smith is busy creating some remarkable revelations. Now, you're all thinking about the plural marriage and that, polygamy thing, but also two other ones that are especially important: baptism of the dead. Baptism of the dead and sealing to eternity. This is like catnip to the Mormon followers. But the only place you can actually get, so what is baptism of the dead? Your dead relatives who were not didn't hear the Book of Mormon, didn't know about these revelations, weren't part of the Mormon church, they get to be brought back in. You get to baptize them through a miraculous connection with Joseph Smith. And the temple will seal those people to eternal life. That's why the temple is so important, the sealing. So while all the story of the Mormon troubles is happening, the people are not even thinking about anything about Illinois or Illinois politics or democracy or all these things I'm talking about, right? They want to get their relatives sealed. They want to get themselves sealed in the temple. So they're focusing all their attention on getting the temple built and finished. Okay, but what's happening on the outside? The anti-Mormons are very worried about the number of Mormons in Hancock County. Nauvoo has 12,000 people in 1844. It rivals Chicago as the largest city in Illinois. They have their own militia. They have their own charter. They have their own mayor, who eventually becomes Joseph Smith. They're running their own state in Illinois. Okay? So the anti-Mormons are saying, wait a minute, we can't even control our own county anymore. They have the sheriff, they have all the judges, they have the juries, right? We don't have self-government anymore. The other thing that's happening is Missouri is still pursuing Joseph Smith on various treason and assassination charges, which I won't get into. But the point is, he is able to secure habeas corpus writs. Habeas corpus is a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card, okay? And he succeeds 5 times in getting his habeas corpus writ established, just as the sheriffs are arresting him. So this is where Thomas Sharp, who's the leader of the anti-Mormons, he says, Joseph Smith cannot be taken. He's above the law. And they start organizing in their own ways to go beyond the law. They start organizing for rough justice. Okay, so the other thing to point out is how the Illinois government at this time, I call it the Illinois way, and the government, the Jacksonian regime, actually endorses this kind of self-enforcing of the law. The anti-Mormons are basically saying, the law's not helping us, we'll go enforce the law. We'll form our own civil society clubs and groups, and we will get Joseph Smith arrested, and we'll try him. So, interestingly, Ford here talks about how the difficulty he's facing, because this is actually an accepted idea in American democracy. He talks about Jackson himself, right? He says, ever since General Jackson, on some great occasions, when the fate of half the country was at stake, took the responsibility to act outside the law, the country has swarmed with a tribe of small statesmen who seem to think that the true secret of government is to set it aside and to resort to mere force upon the occurrence of the smallest difficulties. It may be well enough on great occasions to have one great Jackson, but every occasion but on every small occasion, no one can imagine the damage of having a multitude of little Jacksons. Hancock County was filled with little Jacksons who were going around enforcing the law on their own terms. Okay, so just an example of that is this Paw Grove settler. So in 1843, Joseph Smith gets arrested, and he's going to see if he can get a writ of habeas corpus. But before he can even get to the courtroom, in Lee County, this settler shows up. And he looks at the Missouri sheriff and he says, "You can't kidnap men here, if you do in Missouri. And if you attempt it here, there's a committee in this grove that will sit on your case. And sir, it is the highest tribunal in the United States. As from its decision, there is no appeal." That's the Paw Grove Claim Society. This is a frontier community. It was only founded in 1839. They're all sitting on land. This is 4 years later, right? But he's saying, I and my club are the authority in this county. And you're just some Missouri sheriff. And after all, we kind of like this guy, Joseph Smith. You know, we don't know him from Adam, but we don't like you. And we don't like that you're from Missouri. And we don't like that you're arresting people. And you have to listen to us. We're the authority here. Right? Okay, so there you get the idea. Sometimes these rough justice could intervene on Joseph Smith's behalf. Okay? The Mormons had some societal leverage. They had wealth, they had numbers. Okay? So that's the other thing about developing democracies. The minorities have some heft. They can actually use the law to their advantage. Sometimes that makes the majority go crazy. They hate the minority even more. I'm tired of hearing about this minority. They're on the news all the time. You get the idea, right? So you see how this relates to our time. Okay, there's the Navu, going along a little too long here. Navu Expositor. Let me tell you just the ending of the story. So this is the local anti-Mormon newspaper formed by Mormon apostates. So in the town of Nauvoo itself, some Mormon apostates decide they want to break away from Joseph Smith. And so they publish a newspaper and that says things like, oh, you know, they're polygamous. And you know, Joseph Smith doesn't respect the old settlers. You know, that's the worst thing you could possibly say at that point, right? And so Joseph Smith is very worried. He's the mayor at this point. He convenes the city council. They say that this is a nuisance. It's kind of like having somebody pour bones and dead carcasses of animals, the butcher, into the local creek. And we need to abate this nuisance immediately. And so they go and they basically destroy the building, they destroy the press, and the Nauvoo Legion is called out, and they take the printing press and they break it in the streets of Nauvoo and say, that's what that's worth. That's nothing but libel and defamation and a nuisance. It belongs in the sewer. Well, this is the last straw for the anti-Mormons. This is so clearly wrong from their perspective that they want to immediately go and arrest Joseph Smith, which is exactly what Thomas Ford does. He comes into the county with the militia. He arrests Ford. He puts him in the Carthage jail. And as he has the Carthage Greys guarding the jail. And as he's on the way to Nauvoo, there's the jail itself. It's still standing. Right here is where Joseph Smith came popping out. There's the famous sketch of the assassination. He came down right by the well, and here are the Carthage Greys doing nothing. And it was basically a local group of people who said, we have to take the law into our own hands. They go in to the room with guns ablazing. Smith and his secretary have guns. They have a little shootout. Both Hyrum and Joseph Smith are murdered. Smith makes it to the outside. They shoot him out there again. And he dies there. So the assassination at that point blows up the entire relationship between the Mormons and the anti-Mormons, and thus begins the Mormon troubles, right? Really. And I think 10 people die. It goes on till 1846, and it's very prolonged. You have a battle of Nauvoo. You have the Mormons marching into Carthage and taking over the town. You have a variety of events that kept the community roiling for the next 3 years. And it was basically ungovernable. Okay, so here's Thomas Sharp in his newspaper. Oh no, that's later, I guess. There's an example of the Battle of Nauvoo. It was done by a Mormon artist. They used that for the cover of my book in part. See if I can move things along here. Ford comes back into the county several times with militias, and the people of Hancock do not treat him as an ally. The people of Hancock County see him as a Mormon lackey. The second militia that he comes in with are to find the people who killed Joseph and Hyrum Smith. And so the anti-Mormons don't take kindly to that. They basically say, what do you mean? The Mormons were the problem, not us, right? He's like, well, you just violated the law. I was arresting him. He was going to be charged on physical property damage and about 9 other illegal acts he just took when he summarily destroyed the Navu Expositor. I had him in jail, and they were basically saying, yeah, well, he's been in jail many times. He gets out all the time. So basically, we had to do the deed. But it's amazing how, he basically says, it's amazing how they treated me, because he gets in there the last time, and they show him these ladies' bloomers. Red underwear, of ladies' red underwear, saying, suggesting that they were supposedly owned by Mormon women. That you basically are in bed with the Mormon women. You love the Mormons so much, you don't care about us. We've got our own problems here. We're trying to run our own government now. Because you don't enforce the law, we'll enforce the law ourselves. And he says, when I got there, I couldn't believe it. The people of Hancock believed that they had some kind of government and sovereignty of their own. And to interfere with this was to invade their sacred rights. So it was an ungovernable place. My argument is that both groups had become so polarized that they had basically become ungovernable. I don't think some of this I think we can skip. So I just wanted to get to the ending here. What do we have? Here's Thomas Sharp. He was the one who was on his horse outside the Nauvoo jail saying, okay, time to go in there and get those guys. Fellow citizens, now is the time to put a period to the career of the prophet, sustained as he is by a band of fanatic military saints. We have borne his usurpations until it would be cowardice to bear them any longer. And Sharp is talking about the American Revolution. He talks about the right of self-government. All this was taken away by the Mormons. If we're independent Republicans, we have to be able to govern ourselves. We've lost our ability to govern ourselves. The Mormons are not independent because they're following Joseph Smith. When Joseph Smith says vote for a Democrat, they vote for the Democrat. When Joseph Smith says vote for a Whig, they vote for the Whig. Right? They've made a plaything of party politics. They've made a plaything of democracy. Right? So the anti-Mormons argue. They don't respect the old settlers. They settle in their own state, and they vote as a bloc. These are all examples of their lack of independence. So they fail the test. They fail the independent producer test. Yes, they're producers, but they're not independent. So the locals argue, right, as civil society enforces it. Just my last bit then. I said Ford believed in the neutrality of the state and tried to so act. He did so act on his own evidence and on the evidence as I read it. But in fact, the state is not neutral. In Ford's case, as in my own, it was controlled by Democratic Party leaders. And as in our day, those leaders follow civil society norms as they read them, whether in or out of doors. And outdoors, the old settlers of Hancock were joined by militias from Adams, Henderson, McDonough, and Warren counties, as well as by ones from Iowa and Missouri, all united in the aim to remove the Mormons. This reality of state bias in favor of old settler control confronts all efforts in federated and developing democracies to impose an unpopular justice from the outside. The result will be rough justice as happened during the Mormon troubles, and has happened and will happen during our own troubled times. So I'm putting it to you to say, what would you have done in Ford's case, and how have we really evolved and changed beyond where they were in 1846? Thank you. Okay, will do.
Questions?
Yes, sir.
So you mentioned a little bit Missouri, right?
Yes.
Certainly that would have been forefront in the minds of the saints in wanting to be saved, right? And you mentioned kind of the troubles they had in Missouri. You neglected to mention, from the Governor Boggs, right, the extermination one, right? I mean, that's occupies kind of a mythological place even still. And so to what degree were the non-Mormons in Illinois cognizant of the troubles that the Mormons had in Missouri?
I think.
How might that have, I mean, you talk about misrecognition, right, or misunderstanding. And so you have kind of both sides in Illinois, the Mormons and non-Mormons, both of them operating almost from a position of fear of being safe, right, from the other. And so it just seems like, if Missouri plays a more prominent part in the Mormons' understanding than it does the local Illinoisans, it just seems like another detail. So can you speak to
So the question is basically, isn't it true that Missouri was very much on the minds of the Mormons? And the answer is definitely yes. But the question is also saying, isn't it also true that the Illinoisans should have known about the Missourians' objections and a desire to keep chasing the Mormons? No.
should have, or just did they? Like, how much were they aware?
Oh, so the question is, were the Illinoisans aware of the way the Mormons have been treated in Missouri? Yes. Were they aware that the Missourians claimed, through the extermination order that you mentioned, that the Mormons were, basically persona non grata in that state and were threats? Ultimately, they were trying to get Joseph Smith for treason. And the answer is yes. The people knew that there was trouble with Mormons in Ohio. There had been trouble with Mormons in upstate New York. Okay, so, but they also tried to turn another page. But yes, the Missouri sheriffs did not make it possible to turn another page. They kept on trying to arrest the Mormons, and of course, and Joseph Smith, and of course, this made the Mormons more group-oriented. What happens with groups? They turn inward. They go to protect themselves, right? So the logic of, and again, seeking purity and sealing of in eternity in your temple, right? That's a classic egalitarian. That's what groups do when they're being attacked from the outside. They turn inward and they promote their own worth and value, right? So yes, both the Mormons and the Illinoisans were aware of what was going on, and indeed that exacerbated their efforts to try to develop a fair way of treating the Mormons. But I'm not slighting that in any way. I certainly don't slight it in the book. It's just that it's amazing to me how the focus on their religion was, and fear of Missouri really explains a lot of their behavior. So it's a good point to raise. Sir?
And talking about the things that motivated their behavior, would not having the Mormon press that was producing their scriptures destroyed 10 years ago in much the same way, except people fearing for their lives. I think with the, I don't recall reading in the destruction of the Navu Expositor that people were threatened, just that the paper itself was destroyed. But before, it was sort of like, well, that the same thing happened to us 10 years ago. And, you know, nothing was done to redress that, so maybe this is an acceptable way to deal with a problem.
Yeah, so the questioner is saying, wait a minute, gee, how outlandish really is destroying a printing press when the Mormons had the same thing happen to them? And, you know, Thomas Ford said in his letter to Joseph Smith, hey, those people were fairly mild. You should see what the Illinois press says about me. You know, you just have to accept that this is how it works in liberal democracies. The other thing is, you're absolutely right. Joseph Smith was able to get a lot of Whig lawyers on his side. And they found precedents in Ohio where papers had been considered nuisances. We have to remember, now this is before the First Amendment was applied to the states. Under Barron versus Baltimore in 1833, the states were not to be subject to the Bill of Rights. The first line in the Bill of Rights is Congress shall make no blah, blah, blah. Congress, Congress, Congress. It's a limitation on Congress. It's not a limitation on what Ohio or Illinois or maybe a chartered, and if you look at the Mormon charter, it basically allows them to do whatever they want. Because the Democratic machine at that time wanted to be friendly with the Mormons so they could get the Mormon vote. So, yes, your point is well taken. In many of these habeas corpus cases, the Whig lawyers that Joseph Smith got were the smartest lawyers in the state. They were the hired guns, and they had completely legitimate arguments to make. Maybe not dispositively legitimate, not strong enough to persuade me or someone living in 2020, but arguably plausible. Molly, and then the gentleman. Molly.
A comment and then maybe a question. The comment is this, that it's interesting to me how easy it is to slip into almost kind of a sneering tone about Mormon beliefs and practices. And it's kind of interesting to me because I'm thinking in 2022 what parallels there might be between the kind of sneering tone that it is so easy to fall into. And even as you were describing some of their practices, there was a little ripple of laughter here and there.
Sure.
And it felt a little bit like, I wonder if we're laughing at what they did. And so what I'm saying is, in 2022, I wonder what parallels there are with current groups that religious groups, that it's easy to take that same sort of attitude toward. And if you think things have really changed.
Well, this is the challenge I'm putting to us. I'm basically saying that majority societies, majoritarian cultures, claim to just want to enforce the law neutrally. They claim that all they want to do is, enforce the harm principle. The harm principle, the classic liberal idea, you're free to do what you want as long as you're not harming someone else, right? But, and Jefferson, in his typically clever way, said about freedom of religion, if my neighbor believes in 20 gods or no God, it neither picks my pocket nor breaks my thigh. So there's no harm in someone's belief. But both majorities and minorities have what the religious scholars call discursive practices. They have practices that are part of their way of living as a result of their beliefs. So the Illinoisans had the old settler belief that became a set of norms. I even have one more here. James Hall, in 1831 says basically you got to respect the old settlers if you come to Illinois. You can't settle on your own. I think I've got it on the, but that's not a law. There's no harm there. If people want to settle on their own, you're not violating the law. But that was a de facto law. Similarly, I think minority groups, as minority religions, have beliefs that they put into practice. And those practices implicate the shared society that they're a part of. So what I'm saying is, yeah, both groups have to work together because it's not going to be easy. There are going to be times when you're saying, what is Thomas Sharp says, these Mormons, they're not acting like normal settlers. Well, what's normal? Normal is something that the majority puts in its head as part of its belief structure, right? So I guess I agree with the spirit of your question. I do think, I would say, I have a student right now writing a paper on third-party harm, that religious organizations, in the case of Hobby Lobby, for example, she's basically arguing that there is an actual harm here. If you get a religious exemption for your insurance plans through your business, that you don't have to cover contraception for your female employees or male employees, right? That's impacting, your beliefs are impacting other people now, right? So that would be a perfect concrete example of, in today's society, where a belief reaches out into the world and starts looking like a harm, right? They call it third-party harm, right? But under the harm principle, those kind of third-party harms are not generally respected by the common law. The common law likes to let people wants people to be free to act, and doesn't want to acknowledge those kinds of third-party harms, and that's why she's having trouble arguing. Okay, sir.
Gentlemen, apologies at first. I haven't read the book, so I'm taking the lazy man's way out. And as a business professor, I always shift to the money. And Mormons from Ohio, with Bank of Kirtland and bad notes, bad business practices in Missouri. Now they're in Nauvoo. Their history is catching up with them and their bad business practices. How is that more of an influence than the religious side of it? Or?
For sure. I mean, the anti-Mormons publish all the concrete examples of harm that they can come up with that the Mormons are doing to them. One of which is counterfeiting. And you have to, first of all, this gets back to, once you get a group mentality where you've got the bunker and you're basically saying, we need to protect ourselves against this majority society, they're driving us crazy, right? In Missouri, Joseph Smith says, yeah, you can steal from the Gentiles. You can run a counterfeiting operation. They're the spawn of Satan. Look at the way they're treating us. We're the chosen people. These are the last days. We're preparing the earth for the third coming of Jesus Christ. We've got our temple. We're sealing our people. We're doing what the Book of Mormon says we're supposed to do. We are the saints, right? I mean, there is a lot. So I guess I would say that that's part and parcel of how beliefs operate in a democracy. My second chapter is about the politics of belief. Look at that, and you can disagree with me. But no, I think you're absolutely right. But what the anti-Mormons did not want to acknowledge was that some of the misrecognition had nothing to do with counterfeiting, had nothing to do with so-called theft. By the way, there were a lot of Mormon horse stealing going on. There really was, okay? But it was rather that the Mormons were not acting like a normal group. And they had decided to come to their county and take it over. And that's the part they were always talking about. We've lost our ability to govern ourselves. And if that isn't republicanism, what is? So, yes, the business professors and the Marxists alike all want us to follow the money. It's all, Rabbah, right? It's all about material things, right? He's always arguing, it's about capitalism. It's not about religion. It's about capitalism. It's not about democracy. Yeah, but it's also about democracy. When you're not safe, if your government can't enforce the law, it will not just be about your material possessions. It's also about your life. And that's a very fundamental fear and driver of behavior.
So that's all the time we have for questions, but I'm sure you'll answer more while we're at Post on could borrow that too.
Sure.
Thank you all for coming today. Join us next time, hopefully out at Evergreen Cemetery. We have our cemetery walk coming up at the end of the month, so please join us for that. And have a good rest of the day. And if you haven't got your book, come downstairs and grab one. Or if you have a book and need a signature, he'll be down there too. Thank you so much.